Hello everyone, welcome to my 2024 Forbidden Dreadnought V2 bike check and sort of long-term review. I've had the bike since May, about 3 months, done some changes, things I really like, and as someone who came from the original Dreadnought, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about some of the things that I think Forbidden did very well with this bike compared to the old one, and some of the things that I just like, the nuances. I've done some racing now, I've done some trail riding. We'll get into impressions of those, but also I think I've got enough of a handle on this bike now to say it's definitely an improvement, but let's talk about why. All right, so I've cheated a little bit. I have brought a stand with me just to make sure that we keep the bike in a good viewing position, and also I can free up and talk about different parts that way. Sorry if it ruins the aesthetic for you, but I think it's an absolutely gorgeous bike. As you can tell, mine's a little bit different from the stock colorway. Obviously, I went with Fatty T. I preferred this over the Bloody Sabbath. I think the red looks cool. I'm not big on yellow for some reason on that bike. It doesn't match well with me. I was all about the Fatty T colorway. And it also, coming from the Dreadnought V1 Deep Space 9, matched some of the stickers and sort of colors that I already had. So truthfully, all of the pink that you see, the blue back here, those are just stickers that I had from Slick Graphics for my pre-existing bike, and I just brought them over to this build, and I'm pretty happy with how it looks, actually. I think it looks really, really good. I did go with a size medium. I thought, hey, me at 5'10" and a little bit of change, medium is probably where I should be and should stay, and I have not regretted it. I do think having a smaller bike sometimes does mean a playful bike, and this thing's certainly sturdy enough. I'm not missing anything, I don't think. Now, I did buy the top version of this bike, the XO AXS version, but stripped all that off. I'm all about mechanical gear sets, so straight away, SLX drivetrain, SLX mechanical derailleur, great, works for me. I'm all about it. I break at least one of those a year. I'd rather just spend the $75 to $115 to replace that, as opposed to, you know, a $900 alien thingamajigger that goes on the back that for me just doesn't suit my my riding style. I don't know that the benefits are there for me. Likewise, I've also swapped out the carbon wheels, and I run Noble as always. So TR38 in the rear, TR37 up front, laced to Hydra hubs, pink Hydra hubs, that all came off my last bike and were brought over to this one. I do run a mullet setup. I always have. I've actually never ridden my own full 29er. I've ridden my brother's, some friends and whatnot. I think this bike might be faster in certain circumstances with 29er, but I like the playfulness of the mullet. I enjoy the way that it feels. I've gotten used to it, and look, it's a matter of opinion at the end of the day, so I'm not gonna get into the debate over which is faster, which is better. It's just the way I like my bike. Tires are another change I made this year. On the Continental Cryptotals, DH soft in the rear, 27.5 obviously for the mullet, and 29er Enduro soft in the front. And these are by far the best tires I've ever used. I run Cushcore front and rear, full Cushcore, not the XC. And I have to say, these things grip so well. Usually run about 25 PSI in the rear, 22 to 23 up front. So much turn in, great stability, no sidewall giving out or sort of washing in berms. They're awesome. They roll fast, they're super responsive. In the wet, they feel roughly the same as the Maxxis, but in all other conditions so far, I've been super impressed with how well they work. So if you're thinking about switching over to Contis, I would definitely give that a go. The other obvious big change that I did was the suspension. It came with the Zeb Ultimate up front. I sold that, got rid of it, and threw back on my EXT era V2. It's so plush. It's such an incredible fork. The double air chambers, so the positive and double positive, as well as the coil at the very top for suppleness. It rides so sweet. It sticks to the ground, which I think makes the front of this bike match the rear, sort of the high pivot layout. And speaking of that, I did get the bike with a Vivid Ultimate. Now, I'm not huge on air shocks. I just haven't been on one in a long time. I find them a bit wallowy, and I'm not great at setting them up. I rode the Vivid on this bike for a while because Forbidden changed from 205/65 suspension setup to a 205/60 on this bike. So I actually had to send out my Storia V3 to get rebuilt by Alba Distribution out in Squamish. Immediately when I put back on the Storia V3, the bike felt way better again. It just feels so solid in the mid-stroke. So much more support. Definitely with this bike as well, the way that it corners, and we'll get into that, I think this is the better option. Now, that said, I did have to switch from a 375 spring to a 475 spring. So far, it's been really good. Thankfully, I haven't had to buy another one yet. I might, if I did, I think go actually toward 450 as opposed to the other way and get up to 500, whereas before I had the higher spring. This time I think I'd go with the lower one if I were to switch, but so far I'm pretty happy. A big change I made on this bike compared to the old one, the Mavens. I know a lot of people ask about Mavens, what I think about them, what the general consensus is. When I put them on, I came from Magura MT7s. I had a lot of issues with my Maguras. Most notably, I had a seeping seal in the front, so I had a warranty, but it caused a lot of corrosion, and I just never really got them dialed as good as they were when I first put them on. So I was pleasantly surprised with how much power the Mavens have. There's no question the Mavens are the stronger of the two brakes. I think the modulation was a little bit better in the Magura when they were working well. I find the Maven a little bit binary. I haven't noticed the arm pump a lot of people say because you have to pull them so hard. I don't think that's true. I think they're pretty solid on their own, and I don't know where that's coming from, because I think these things are on and absolutely bound to the rotors with not much pulling at all. So not sure where that came from. Obviously with the Mavens, I'm running the 200 rotors front and rear. That's the ones that come with it. So it's just the SRAM kit through and through. Continuing with the cockpit, obviously everything's brought over from the old bike, so I'm still running the Rev Grip handguards. I've got 2 majorly broken wrists that have had surgery, one of which still needs surgery. Anything I can do to dissipate a hit, look, I'm taking it. Have your opinions as you will. I run them either way. Grips. Now the grips, I will say I've gone through a number of grips. My favorite grips outright, straight up how they feel in my hands for ergonomics, are the P&W Lohms. I think the P&W Lohms are phenomenal grips. However, they have a huge issue. They don't allow you to put in a higher density bar end. And as a result, anytime you clip a tree, it rips the grip completely in half. And I've gone through so many sets just from clipping trees, even just low side crashes where they scrape against the ground. So in search of something a little bit more solid that fit my hands and not give me arm pump, I went to the Ergon GA2s. The big thing was I could put on big knobby bar ends, and as you can see, they've definitely had their wear and tear and tested and tried, and they've held up, and that also helps protect the 1-Up carbon bar. I run the carbon bar at a 35 mil rise. That's attached to an i9 A35 stem at 50 mil, which has the plus or minus rise of 5, I think it's 5-degree offset. That's my cockpit setup. As I said, I definitely don't mind the mechanical gears. Oh, and dropper. I run the 1-Up, the new lever that allows you to integrate the cable into it, and that is attached to a 200 mil P&W dropper post that has an Ergon SM135 saddle on it. I've had this saddle since 2018. It was on my Process, the last Dreadnought, and now this bike. The Ergon's definitely seen some days. It's sort of delambing in the back. If you ever have that issue, just get some shoe glue, chuck it in there, attach it back in, no issue. And I'll do that again shortly because obviously it's starting again. Now, one of the most interesting things about this is the crankset. I did say that I ordered the bike with the AXS XO drivetrain. This bike is 9 millimeters lower at the bottom bracket than the V1. And the V1 came with 170 cranks, and I was running Trivatives on that. I ran them on this bike to start with, but I was pedal striking quite a bit. So I went completely off-brand here, and my brother actually ordered a set from AliExpress. They're DMRs, never heard of them. Very similar to a Shimano setup with a cinch bolt. And they're 160s. They're solid. I'm probably gonna look for a brand, like a known brand name 160, but I have to say I really enjoy the 160s. My hips feel a little more open in corners. My cadence is a little higher, which actually means shifting through the gears, I'm more closely matched when spinning. Even though the ratio is about the same, I did drop down to a 32 tooth chain ring on the front to compensate. I was on 34 because running mullet, I went up. Now I've gone back down. It works out to the same math. But I just feel like I'm spinning a little quicker. It definitely feels like I've lost a little bit of power, but overall, I think that the cadence makes up for it. And in cornering, in jumping, the bike just feels so much more free and open because my hips are more forward. I've really enjoyed it. I know a lot of people don't like going that short. Maybe 165 would be the sweet spot, but I'm certainly not against the 160s so far. So how does it ride? Well, that's everyone's question. Obviously, a new bike on the market. I know it's not super new now. It's a couple of months old. Like I said, I got mine back in May. But I have to say, big improvement over the first one. The first bike was a two-piece, so front triangle, rear triangle, single swing arm, single high pivot bike. And I found that sometimes what would happen is, even though it was very supple over the small hits, it would get into a rebound circuit that if it was rebounding against the hits that you were receiving, so if it just got out of sync with the trail, you would kind of feel a bit of harshness as it would fight forward with the rebound as opposed to downward on a conventional suspension layout. And I definitely noticed it at times, especially in quick hit chunk. It would just eventually just start kind of getting more bucky as I went. This bike doesn't seem to do that. The rebound circuit seems a lot more gradual with the invert horse link. Obviously this is a three-piece bike, so single front triangle again, but you have a chain stay and a seat stay. I've done that backwards with my hands. Portions to the bike in the rear. And I think overall it's a lot more supple. It also is a lot more poppy in spite of being, just as planted, better in the rebound. It's more fun on jumps, and I feel like the bike is more versatile because of it. But the biggest change I noticed, and this was one that I didn't think was gonna be as noticeable immediately, is definitely the front of the bike. The front of this bike is way more responsive than the first one. It turns in so much quicker. It's a little bit taller, but in spite of that, it doesn't tend to sort of wander when climbing. And I know that that was one of my issues with the first frame, is if I raised my stack up, I found I just kind of got a little all over the place when climbing. The bike just didn't, kind of wanted to fall sideways. Now I find this bike's very good at climbing still, but it just handles so much better. The one thing I will say is that when you get it into a corner, when you start to drive it through, you do have to weight the bike. You've got to push it in and get that suspension loaded up so that it can hold that corner. But once you get used to that riding aspect, it's incredibly good. And that's the one thing I will say again with that mid-stroke support, and I said I would come back to this, I find the Storia so much better than the Vivid for that, because I can really rail into a corner and that mid-stroke support's there. I don't get that wallowiness of the air suspension. And yeah, that's, I think, been a huge improvement going back to the Storia. There is some really cool things as well with this bike that I think they fix from the first version. Most notably, they have gone to UDH, that's obvious, but because of that, it's created a bit more of an offset from where the dropouts are and the carbon rear triangle is versus the chain when you're in your smallest cog. The first bike, even if your B tension was dead on, there were issues. If you got any chain skip at all, it would cut into the carbon. I remember I was loading mine up with nail polish because I kept getting chain cuts right there. You'd also get a lot of slap along the top of the seat stay. With this bike, obviously the chain line now comes backwards toward the idler. Now that the chain line is underneath of the seat stay, there's a lot more clearance between the frame and the chain, and it doesn't have that issue. And that was a huge one for me because I genuinely thought I was gonna have to warranty the first frame eventually when I first started riding it. I thought there's no way this is gonna last. Managed to get through it, managed to keep it going, but this is a much better design in that regard. The dropouts as well, obviously I said I was running MX. You swap the dropouts now as opposed to the Ziggy Link, which does bring me into something I don't like about this bike. In the time that I've had it, and roughly 450, 500 kilometers of riding it, I have had to tighten the dropouts twice. They have come loose entirely on their own. I think I probably could put more Loctite onto them and it would help a lot, but I was very surprised at how quickly those were coming loose. Now, if that's a negative, one thing I will say as a positive is I just did my first full rebuild of this bike. I was super shocked at how well the pivots are holding up. I didn't put any PPL1 on them when I built the bike. I thought, let's just put it in there as factory, see how it holds up. We'll ride it, lightly, keep it in good weather and all that, and then I'll come back to it and get to it and go to work. you know, doing my standard maintenance. And I was shocked. Every single pivot still had lube on it without me adding any. So definitely the new seals, the new caps with the outer screws over top of the inner sort of shaft, I guess. Don't mind me. Is a much better system. It seems to be far more weather resistant, far more resilient, and that was pleasantly surprised about that. So that's it. That's my run through. I do run my Garmin up top in a different position now with the 76 mounts curved, because the top tube's actually curved on this bike as opposed to the other one that was flat. I like it back here. It stays off the logo, keeps it looking cleaner up top. Pink bottle because it would be rude not to. It's got to match the bike. I do run the one-up pump with the toolkit inside of it and a mud hugger up front. And the one other little feature on this bike that is super special and dear to me is my top cap. I've got Jaden on my arm. Obviously, she's no longer with us. She passed away about 1.5 years ago. But she was my riding buddy, my trail buddy. The reason that I got into biking, essentially, was because my brother took her. She loved it, and I thought, well, if it's good for her, it's good for me. And so now she's on my top cap, and therefore always on the bike and always in the woods with me, forever and always. So that's just a little detail. But there you go. There's my 2024 Forbidden Dreadnought V2 bike check. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, found something interesting in it. Maybe answered some questions about setup that you might have, or if you're considering getting a Dreadnought, hopefully this pushes you toward it, because I don't think you could possibly regret owning one of these bikes. They're beautiful bikes, and they ride so well. As always, thanks for stopping by the channel, and I've got a lot more content coming up between racing and a lot of trail building that I really should have been filming for the last 2 years, but do plan to do and get out to you guys. So hit subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in another video.